I have made plenty of videos on how to bake with normal yeast, and I think now is the time to show you how to make a sourdough starter. This will take your baking to the next level, and it is a lot easier to do than you would think. All you need is strong white bread flour, filtered water at room temperature, a little jar to mix it all in, a spoon or spatula, and scales. And yes, we are using only flour and water. I know a lot of these mythical recipes require honey and grapes and apples and whatnot. You don't need any of that. Flour and water is all you need. And I would suggest using the same flour that you use for bread baking for feeding your starter. So let's begin. Get your little jar, weigh out 50 grams of room temperature filtered water and 50 grams of flour and mix it all up. I say filtered water because tap water is usually full of all kinds of chemicals and you don't want to use that for feeding your starter. So you are mixing this at a 1-to-1 ratio, or at 100% hydration in baker's talk. You can check the video description for more details because I'll write down metric and imperial units down there. The natural yeast is everywhere. It's all around, it's on your table, it's in the air, it's on fruit, it's in the flour, it's even on your hands. So if you want, you can mix your starter using your hands. I am using a spatula because my hands are already contaminated with sourdough. If I were to mix this by hand, it would probably be ready in 2 days. But for demonstration purposes, I wanted to show you some more realistic time frame. Because making a sourdough starter takes up to 14 days. So just give it a good mix until you don't see any more dry flour. You don't want to cover your starter too tight, just put the lid on loosely. You want some space for gas to escape. I mean, there will be no gas at this point, but in the future you should get used to this. And that is it. You have taken the first step to making your own sourdough starter. And because it will be something that is alive, give it a name. I called my starter Flint, in memory of the late great Keith Flint from The Prodigy. And now you can leave it out for 24 hours. And as you can see, nothing is happening. And that's normal. So, it's day number 2. Old Flint is still sleeping, so we need to feed him for the first time. Get your flour, your room temperature water, scales, and a little spatula or spoon. And what we need to do now is take out 50 grams. Remember, we weighed out 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour for a total weight of 100. We're gonna discard 50 and replace with fresh flour and fresh water. It may seem a bit wasteful, but that's what we have to do. So because the initial mix was equal parts flour and water, that is what we will be replacing it with. We took away 50 grams of mix and we need to replace it with 25 grams of flour and 25 grams of water, equaling 50 grams. And you may think, well, instead of discarding, why don't we just add more flour and water every day? But there's a reason for that. And if you keep adding and adding, in 2 weeks you'll end up with 50 kilos sourdough starter. So we just want to discard a little bit and add a little bit back every single day. So just as before, give it a good mix until you don't see any more dry flour. Cover it up and leave it for 24 hours. And most likely, you'll come in next day and nothing would have happened. And this is completely normal. We will just keep doing this until we capture some of that natural yeast that is all around us. And you only need a tiny amount, because once it's there, you'll start growing exponentially. So on day number 3, we repeat what we did on day number 2, which is take out 50 grams, replace with 25 grams of flour, 25 grams of water. And we'll just keep on doing this until we start seeing activity. Now, the reason why sometimes recipes suggest adding grapes or apples or something like that to your starter is because, yes, there is natural yeast on those fruit. And you can especially see that on grapes. The little white layer on them, that is the natural yeast. But I personally think you don't need to put this in your sourdough starter because, you might end up with funky grapes in the mix. And no one wants that. The yeast is everywhere and we will catch it. trust me. So on day number 4, repeated the same steps as on day number 2 and 3 and left it overnight for 24 hours. Still, nothing is happening. And you know, you may think, wow, I'm just gonna give up, what is this? But keep at it, trust me, it will work. Sometimes it takes longer, sometimes it takes less time. But as you can see, on day number 5, we start seeing activity. It's bubbling up, took it around 12 hours or so. And now when you look at it, you can see it's bubbly, it smells a bit sour, and it's a lot more runny than before because it's fermented. Now don't get discouraged if it takes you longer. My kitchen is contaminated with sourdough, so that's why it took only 5 days. So once you start seeing activity, we'll change up the feeding process. We'll feed it at a 1 to 10 to 10 ratio, which means taking 1 part of the starter and adding 10 parts water, 10 parts flour. For example, adding 2 parts starter, 20 grams of flour, 20 grams of water, right? Simple. So this will slow it down. If you feed it a larger proportion of flour and water, it will take a longer time to eat through it. And this 1 to 10 to 10 ratio is just a guideline, because every single starter is different, every single kitchen is different, and all of our starters may react in a different way. What you need to do is experiment and then get some idea of how long it takes to ferment and how much to feed it. But a 1 to 10 to 10 ratio is just about perfect for me, because it takes around 16 hours for it to be fully fermented and ready to be used. Now once again, mix it all up, cover it and leave it overnight. See what happens. As you can see, old Flinty is alive and kicking. And that's it. This you can actually put into your recipe and use it to leaven your bread. It's nice and fluffy, full of bubbles, and it's also quite stretchy. You don't want this to be loose. If it's loose and runny, it means it's over fermented and you need to redo it again and maybe change your ratios and try another day. So that's simple enough, right? So what we need to do now is maintain our starter. So let's imagine you've taken out most of this and used it in a recipe, and you've been left with maybe 5 grams or so. So for the next 30 days or so, we want to strengthen our starter. We want to give it a good feeding rhythm. We want it to keep it happy, you know? So for the daily feeding, I would also suggest doing a 1 to 10 to 10 ratio and make as little as possible. We don't want to be wasteful here. You can even go 1 gram of starter, 10 grams of flour, 10 grams of water, just to reduce the waste. Of course, there are different ways of using up excess sourdough starter. You can put it in pancakes, you can make crackers with it, but I don't bake that much to be using it. Maybe in the future I'll make a video on how to use your sourdough discard, but for now, just feed it on a daily basis, just to keep it strong and ready to be used. After the initial 30 days or so, you'll be able to place this in the fridge and then maybe feed it once a week if you don't have time to feed it every day. But up until then, we need to develop it and make it nice and strong. And this is what we call feeding the starter. Now you may have heard of the term building the leaven. Let me explain. You are feeding your starter every day to maintain it, while you are building the leaven to use for baking or for leavening your bread. So to build the leaven, I use a different ratio. I use a 1 to 2 to 2 ratio. So 1 part starter, 2 parts flour, 2 parts water. And I know this will take around 10 hours to rise and be ready for baking. And you can adjust it to your needs. You can use colder water to make it rise more slowly. You can make it further in advance to fit your schedule. It's up to you really. But remember, always keep your starter separate and feed it separately. And when you want to build the leaven, you take a part of the starter, add it to a new jar, add more flour, add more water, and this will be used for your baking. You will use the whole thing. And if you mess up and only feed your starter and then place it all in your bread dough, then you'll end up losing it, right? And that's the leaven. As you can see, it's bubbling up nicely, and you will know that it's ready when it starts collapsing back down. And again, if it's really flat and runny, it's over fermented, and then you have to start all over again. But this one looks nice and strong, full of air. And if you have reached this point, you can click the link at the end of this video and I'll show you how to use this in a bread dough. Any questions or suggestions, write them down in comments, and as always, thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next one.